This is the story of Tunde, a poor orphan, a boy who knew only hunger and pain but never let bitterness take root in his heart. One day, his kindness to a helpless old woman opened a door that no human hand could close. What followed would change not just his life, but the way his entire village understood the power of doing good. Stay with me, because this African folktale will remind you that sometimes heaven listens quietly and rewards in ways no one can explain. The village of Akure sat quietly between two long stretches of forest. In the mornings, mist rolled slowly over the red soil paths, and by noon, the sound of cutlasses, distant laughter, and the rhythm of pestles filled the air. Palm trees lined the edges of the farms, swaying lazily under the weight of their ripe fruits. It was the kind of place where everyone knew one another by name and where gossip traveled faster than the wind. Life was simple, hard, but predictable. And for a long time, that was all Tunde knew. He lived with his parents in a small mud house at the far end of the village. His father, Jide, was a palm wine tapper, a man of strong arms and quiet discipline. He rose before dawn, carrying his climbing rope and calabash, moving through the bush with a rhythm that had become second nature. His mother, Mero, was a graceful woman who farmed cassava, yam, and vegetables. Her laughter carried through the air like the sound of clean water hitting stone. Together, they lived a life that was poor but peaceful. Every evening, they would sit outside their hut, watching the fading sky as Tunde, then about 6 years old, ran in circles chasing grasshoppers with the village children. He was their only child, and though their hands were calloused from work, they raised him with tenderness. One morning, the air was unusually still. Jide had woken earlier than usual because he wanted to tap the last 4 palm trees before the sun became too hot. Mero insisted on following him, saying she wanted to weed a small patch of land nearby. They carried their cutlass and climbing rope, and Tunde, too small to help but too attached to stay home, ran after them barefoot, his little feet kicking dust into the morning air. The farm was about 2 miles away, surrounded by tall trees and thick undergrowth. Birds chattered noisily overhead as his father climbed the first tree with ease, tying his rope around the trunk and swinging up like a man born to the sky. Tunde watched with admiration, clapping whenever his father poured the foamy wine into the calabash and lowered it gently down. His mother laughed at his excitement, her wrapper tucked between her legs as she bent to pull weeds from the soil. It was a peaceful morning until it wasn't. On the 4th tree, as Jide reached for the rope, his foot slipped. The sound of the fall was loud enough to scatter the birds. Mero looked up too late. The heavy body of her husband came crashing down on her. There was no scream, no struggle, just a thud, the silence, and the sudden stillness that followed. Tunde stood frozen, the clay pot in his hands falling to the ground and shattering into pieces. He didn't move. The sight before him made no sense. The people who gave him life lay motionless, their faces half covered in mud. By the time the first villagers arrived after hearing his distant wail, he was still standing there, trembling, his eyes wide and empty. The burial happened 2 days later. The villagers gathered under the big udala tree, whispering about how cruel fate could be. Women sang slow dirges that carried through the wind. Tunde sat at the edge of the crowd, dressed in oversized black clothes. His eyes were swollen, but no more tears came. He didn't understand everything the adults said, only that his parents were gone to rest. That evening, as the crowd dispersed and smoke from the cooking fires drifted into the darkening sky, he was taken by his father's younger brother, Uncle Duro. "You'll stay with us now," Duro said curtly, leading him by the wrist. His wife Fumi stood behind him, her face expressionless. Her eyes scanned the boy as if weighing a burden she didn't want. Tunde turned once more to look at the mound of red earth that covered his parents, but Duro's hand tightened around his wrist, pulling him away. The house he entered that night was not like his parents' home. It smelled of charcoal and cold stew, and the air carried no warmth. In the corner of the small compound, 2 children, his cousins, sat eating rice from enamel plates. When he greeted them softly, they ignored him. From that day, Tunde's life became a chain of chores and punishment. Before dawn, while the sky was still gray, he would wake up, sweep the compound, wash the plates from the previous night, and walk to the stream with a heavy clay pot. The stream was nearly a mile away. His bare feet cracked from walking on sharp stones, and when he slipped and spilled even a drop, Fumi would beat him with a broomstick before he could even catch his breath. He fetched firewood, washed their clothes, and fed the chickens. Sometimes he was so exhausted that his hands trembled when lifting the pestle, but she never cared. His cousins, Kunli and Bisi, did nothing. They sat in the veranda, eating mangoes, laughing, and calling him the houseboy. When visitors came, Fumi would tell them proudly that she was raising her late brother-in-law's son, but as soon as they left, she would send him to wash the plates they used, muttering under her breath about useless orphans who come to eat other people's food. Food was another form of punishment. When they ate rice, he was given beans. When they ate soup, he got plain yam. Some nights, he got nothing at all. He would lie on his mat, his stomach burning from hunger, listening to the sound of their laughter as they ate from the kitchen. Once, when he asked for food after being kept without lunch, Fumi slapped him so hard he saw stars. "You think this is your father's house?" she barked. His uncle watched from a distance, saying nothing. The silence hurt more than the beating. On days when the rain came and everyone stayed indoors, he was still sent out to fetch firewood from the forest. The cold would soak him to the skin, but Fumi would still shout, "Why are you shaking? Are you made of paper?" Sometimes he would work all morning and all afternoon, only to be scolded for missing a spot while sweeping. There were nights he fell asleep on the floor before finishing his chores, and when Fumi found him there, she would kick his leg to wake him. "Lazy boy? You will sleep when you finish." Once, his cousin Kunli spilled palm oil on the floor. Fumi beat Tunde for it. "If you were useful, things like this wouldn't happen," she said, ignoring his tears. Over time, he stopped defending himself. Words no longer worked. He learned silence, how to nod even when wronged, how to swallow pain without protest. By the time he turned 12, Tunde had grown lean and quiet. His back had faint scars from old beatings. His hands were rough from carrying heavy firewood. Yet, his eyes held no hatred. He greeted every elder with respect, even those who gossiped about his misfortune. When Fumi's youngest child fell sick, Tunde stayed up all night fanning the boy, changing wet cloths, whispering prayers he learned from the church hymns he once heard from afar. Nobody thanked him, but he didn't expect thanks. On the few days he was sent to the market, people pitied him. Some gave him leftover fruits. Others told him, "God will reward you one day." He would smile faintly and nod. At night, when the compound grew silent and only the sound of crickets filled the air, Tunde lay outside on his mat, watching the moon. He thought about his parents, the way his mother used to sing while pounding yam, the way his father's laughter echoed after palm wine. The memories hurt, but they were all he had. Sometimes he spoke softly, as though they were listening. "Pommy, Mama, I'm trying. I haven't become like them." His voice often broke. Tears would come, slow and quiet, until his chest ached. He would press his palms against his face, trying not to sob too loudly. Above him, the night sky stretched wide and silent. The wind rustled through the trees, brushing gently against his skin as though comforting him. He did not know the heavens had already seen his tears. By the time Tunde turned 23, his name had become a familiar whisper in Akure. Everyone knew him, not for wealth or power, but for something rarer. He was known as the poor orphan who never complains. In a village where people found joy in gossip and pity in abundance, Tunde's quiet endurance had made him part of the landscape itself. He lived alone in a small mud hut at the far end of the village behind a cluster of mango trees that shaded his roof. The hut had once belonged to his late uncle, but after the man's death, no one wanted to live there again. Fumi had left with her children years before his uncle died. Only Tunde lived there. He had no wife, no close friend, and no property except a mat, a lantern, and 2 clay pots for fetching water. His days were the same, slow, honest, and silent. He worked on people's farms for little pay, cleared bush paths, fetched firewood for old women, and repaired mud fences when the rains damaged them. People often wondered how a young man could live like that without bitterness. Some pitied him. Others mocked him behind closed doors. But Tunde never responded. On one of the afternoons when the sun burned so fiercely that even the trees looked tired. The air shimmered, the red sand cracked underfoot, and everyone sought shade. Tunde had no such luxury. He walked barefoot along the narrow footpath that led to the stream, his worn shorts dust-stained, and a large clay pot balanced carefully on his shoulder. The pot was old, chipped on one side, but it had served him for years. Sweat ran freely down his face, tracing dark lines through the dust on his skin. The heat was heavy, pressing against his chest, and every few steps he stopped to wipe his brow with the back of his hand. Ahead, the path curved sharply around a thick cluster of bushes, and beyond it, he could already hear the distant chatter of women washing clothes by the river. He was halfway down the slope when he noticed her. An old woman stood by the side of the path, bent almost double, struggling to lift a heavy pot of water onto her head. Her hand shook as she tried to steady the load, and her knees trembled under her thin frame. Her wrapper was faded, her head tie loose and damp with sweat. A few people passed by, but none of them stopped to help her. One woman even looked at her briefly, muttered something about witches and old age, and walked faster. Tunde watched for a moment. He didn't know her. In fact, he had never seen her before. Something about her presence felt unusual. She wasn't from the village. Her clothes looked different. Still, when she almost lost her balance, Tunde dropped his own pot and rushed forward without thinking. "Let me help you, Mama," he said, gently taking the pot from her trembling hands before she could protest. The woman exhaled, a long, shaky breath of relief. She nodded slowly, her eyes tired but soft. "Thank you, my son," she whispered. Her voice was frail but clear. "People walk past me like I don't exist. May God see your heart." Tunde balanced the pot on his shoulder. "Don't worry, Mama. I'll carry it to your house." She looked at him for a long moment before pointing toward the far end of the path. "It's not far, my son. Just by the forest's edge." The direction made him hesitate. The forest was thick and avoided by most villagers. They believed strange things lived there, spirits, shadows, and voices that called out names at night. But Tunde didn't think of that. He nodded, adjusted the pot, and followed her quietly. The walk took longer than he expected. The sun had lowered slightly, painting the path in uneven streaks of gold. The village sounds faded behind them. No more chatter, no sound of pestles or laughter, only the faint hum of insects and the crunch of dry leaves under their feet. The deeper they went, the quieter it became, until even the birds stopped singing. The only sound left was the steady rhythm of Tunde's breathing and the slow tap of the woman's walking stick. Once or twice, he looked up, wondering how far they still had to go, but the old woman only smiled and said, "We're close." At last, they reached a small clearing. Her hut stood there, small, round, and built from old mud bricks darkened by age. A broken stool sat outside beside a pile of firewood. Smoke rose faintly from a clay stove, and a mat lay neatly rolled by the door. It was the kind of place no one would have noticed, hidden deep within the trees. Tunde set the pot gently beside the hut and stepped back. "Here, Mama," he said, wiping his face with his sleeve. "You should rest now. Or is there anything else I can do for you?" The old woman nodded. "You are kind," she said, her eyes fixed on him in a way that made him slightly uncomfortable. Her gaze wasn't ordinary, it was calm, steady, and knowing. She looked at him as if she had seen his life already, the years of pain behind his quiet eyes. "Sit down, my son," she said softly. Tunde hesitated. "Mama, I should be going." The son, "Sit," she repeated gently, and for reasons he couldn't explain, he obeyed. The air around them felt different now. The wind had shifted. The leaves rustled once and then went still as though the world had paused to listen. The woman walked slowly toward him and placed her hand on his shoulder. Her palm was warm but light. "You are a good boy," she said quietly. "Many people see old age and turn away. You didn't." Tunde looked down shyly. "It's nothing, Mama." "You needed help." She smiled, a small, tired smile that deepened the lines on her face. "Nothing you do with a pure heart is ever nothing." She paused, looking past him toward the trees. Then she stepped back, her expression changing slightly, gentler but deeper. "Kneel down, my son," she said. Tunde frowned, surprised. "Mama? Kneel," she repeated softly. Her voice had an authority that didn't match her frail frame. Heaven remembers kindness. He hesitated only a moment before kneeling on the dusty ground. The woman placed both hands on his head. Her fingers were light but firm, and when she spoke again, her voice seemed to carry far beyond the clearing. "My son," she said slowly, "you have suffered and never cursed your pain. You have been wronged, but your heart stayed pure. You have been hungry, but your hands stayed open. People like you are rare. The world forgets them, but heaven does not." Tunde kept his eyes closed. He didn't understand what she meant, but something in her tone silenced every question forming in his mind. She continued, "Many will pass tests of strength and fail the test of kindness. But you, Tunde, you have passed both. From today, may the ground you walk on remember your name. May hunger never visit your home again. May your hands find abundance, but may your heart never lose its gentleness." And with those words, the world around them went completely still. The next evening came with a quiet that felt heavier than usual. The air was still warm from the afternoon sun, and the sky carried that pale orange glow that comes just before dusk. Tunde had spent most of the day restless, unable to focus on any of his chores. The memory of the old woman lingered in his mind, her voice, her strange calmness, and the way the air around her hut had gone still when she spoke. He had helped many people before, but something about her felt different. It wasn't just gratitude he had seen in her eyes. It was as though she knew more about him than anyone ever could. He tried to shake off the thought, telling himself he was only imagining things, but by evening, he couldn't resist the urge to go back. He filled his small calabash with water, washed his face, and took the same narrow path that led toward the forest. The ground was soft under his bare feet, and the smell of evening dust mixed with the faint scent of palm leaves burning in distant compounds. By the time he reached the edge of the forest, the light was fading. The trees loomed taller in the dim glow, their shadows stretching across the path. He walked slowly, recognizing the same bend where he had first seen the woman struggling with her pot. But, as he approached the clearing, his steps faltered. Something felt wrong. The path that led to her hut seemed quieter than before, no distant sounds of birds, no wind rustling through the trees, no hum of insects. Just silence thick and unnatural. His pace quickened. Within minutes, he reached the exact spot where her hut had stood the previous day and stopped cold. The clearing was empty. The hut was gone. The stool by the fire, the pile of wood, the rolled mat, everything had vanished. The ground looked freshly swept, smooth and untouched, as if no one had ever lived there. Tunde blinked several times, his heart racing. He walked around the clearing, searching for any trace of her, footprints, ashes, anything. But there was nothing. Not even a dent where her cooking stones had been. He stood still for a long moment, confused and uneasy. "Mama?" he called softly, his voice uncertain. When no one answered, he called again, louder this time. "Mama, it's me, Tunde." His voice echoed faintly through the trees and faded. The stillness of the forest pressed against his ears. He tried again, calling her name and walking in circles. He searched behind the trees, looked down the small slope near the stream, even peered into the bushes, but she was nowhere to be found. He started to feel the first sting of fear. The forest, which had looked so ordinary the day before, now felt alive in a way that made his skin prickle. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. Every whisper of the wind felt like a breath near his ear. He wanted to leave, but something made him stay, a quiet tug in his chest, the same feeling he'd had when he first met her. Then, from somewhere behind him, a calm, echoing voice spoke his name. Tunde. He froze. The voice was unmistakable. It was hers. It wasn't loud, but it filled the entire clearing, soft yet deep, like it came from everywhere at once. His chest tightened. He turned around quickly, eyes scanning the trees, but there was no one. "Tunde," the voice called again. "Do not be afraid." His legs felt weak. "Mama," he whispered. "Where are you?" "I am where kindness is remembered," the voice replied, still calm, still echoing from every direction. "You came to me with a pure heart when others turned away. You did not ask for reward. You did not boast of your goodness. For that, heaven has remembered you." Tunde swallowed hard. The air had changed again, cool now, almost cold, and the trees seemed to sway without wind. His breath came in short bursts, his heart thumping loudly in his chest. "I don't understand," he said, his voice barely steady. "You do not need to understand," the voice continued. "You only need to believe. Go home, my son. Inside your room, you will find the same clay pot you helped me carry. Inside it, you will see large amount of cowries. Anytime you need money, any amount, look into that pot and you will find it. But remember this, Tunde, never tell anyone your source of wealth. The pot is invisible to others, only you can see it. Keep your heart clean and it will never fail you." For a moment, everything went completely silent again. Then a light breeze passed through the trees, gentle but firm, and the leaves trembled as if bowing to something unseen. Tunde stood frozen, his hands shaking slightly. His mouth felt dry and his body felt weightless, caught between fear and awe. He knelt down slowly, not because he was told to, but because something inside him demanded it. The air around him was cool now, the smell of damp earth strong and clean. The voice did not return, but he felt it still, near him, watching. For a few moments, he remained kneeling, head bowed, eyes shut, until the forest seemed to return to normal. The crickets began to sing again. The faint hum of insects returned. It was as if nothing had happened. He stood up, his legs trembling, and without looking back, he began to run. He didn't think about where his feet landed or how fast he moved. He just ran. The path home felt longer than usual, the shadows of trees stretching wider in the fading light. Branches scraped against his arms as he passed, and his breath came fast and uneven. When the edge of the forest finally broke into open ground, he didn't stop until he reached his compound. His chest burned from running. He pushed open the wooden door of his hut and froze. There, in the corner of the small room, sat the same clay pot, the one he had helped the old woman carry. But it looked different now. It was clean, smooth, and faintly glowing in the dim light from the small oil lamp. Tunde's breath caught in his throat. He took a step closer, heart pounding so hard it echoed in his ears. The glow wasn't bright, just a soft, warm radiance that seemed alive. He hesitated before kneeling beside it. His hands trembled as he reached out and touched the rim. It was warm to the touch, almost like it was breathing. He leaned forward and looked inside. What he saw left him speechless. The pot was filled with cowries, not a handful but countless, glittering softly under the lamplight. He dipped his hand into it and pulled out a few, but more seemed to appear from beneath, as though the pot had no end. His hands shook as he stared at them. He dropped the cowries back into the pot and stepped back slowly, still staring. A chill passed through him, but not a fear, something closer to disbelief. He sat there for a long time, watching the faint light flicker on the surface of the pot, unsure whether to laugh, cry, or run. That night, Tunde could not sleep. After that strange night in the forest, Tunde's life quietly began to change. Each morning when he woke, his eyes would wander toward the clay pot resting in the corner of his small hut, still filled with the same endless cowries. It was no longer a dream to him. The woman's words echoed in his mind each time he looked at it. Anytime you need money, any amount, look into that pot, and you will find it. The cowries never reduced. Whenever he took from it, the amount left behind looked the same. The first time he decided to use it, he simply walked to the corner, scooped a handful of cowries, and tied them in his cloth. He didn't ask for anything. He just took what was there, remembering she had said he would always have enough. He used the cowries to buy baskets of yam, palm oil, and smoked fish from the nearby village market. With that, he started trading, selling to farmers and travelers who passed through Akure. The profit was good, but Tunde did not touch it. He saved everything carefully in calabashes and wrapped cowries in small cloth bundles, hidden under his mat. Whenever he wanted to buy new goods, he simply went back to the pot, collected more cowries, and continued trading. Over time, his trade grew larger than he planned. The pot gave him enough to trade in big quantities: 20 baskets of yam, 5 kegs of palm oil, sacks of pepper and dried meat. He hired young boys to help him transport his goods to nearby markets. His name began to spread through neighboring villages. People spoke of the once poor orphan who now bought goods in bulk without borrowing. Yet no one could explain how he had found such capital. Some said he found a treasure buried by his late father. Others said he was just lucky. Tunde ignored every rumor. He remained focused, patient, and disciplined. After some years, he expanded beyond food produce. He began selling fine clothes brought by travelers and later, gold and diamonds that came from merchants who journeyed from the western coast. In those days, gold and precious stones were carried by foot traders hidden in goatskin bags, and only trusted men could buy from them. Tunde became one of those few men. He paid fairly, never cheated anyone, and his reputation grew stronger. In a few seasons, he had become one of the wealthiest traders in the entire region, yet he still lived quietly. The more his wealth increased, the simpler he became. He didn't build a fence around himself or boast in gatherings. He still went to the farm sometimes to help old men uproot yam, and he still carried firewood to widows' homes. But quietly, he began to use his money for others. He bought food for orphans and left it at their doorstep at night. He repaired the roof of the small shrine where travelers slept during the rainy season. He helped rebuild the market square that had been abandoned. With time, his home began to change too. The small mud hut where he once lived was pulled down, and in its place he built a large compound that became the pride of Akure. It was made entirely of smooth red clay and decorated with carved patterns that glowed golden in the sun. The walls were firm, strong, and beautifully polished with a mixture of earth and palm oil, giving them a rich color. Each doorway was marked with hand-painted drawings, images of trees, animals, and calabashes done by skilled craftsmen from nearby villages. The compound had 4 large rooms joined by a long corridor, a wide courtyard in the middle, and a small open kitchen by the side. On one end stood a granary for his goods, and on the other, a rest hut where guests could sit. People came from other villages just to admire the building. There was nothing like it anywhere nearby. The villagers began to say that Tunde's compound was proof that patience could outlive poverty. His status in the village grew, but it did not change him. He still greeted elders first. He never allowed anyone to call him chief or master. He insisted on being treated like any other man. When people tried to question how he could afford such wealth, he smiled and said, "When a man plants good seeds, rain will always find them." His humility silenced even the envious ones. Those who once mocked him now praised him openly, pretending they had always believed in him. But Tunde remembered everything, the days of hunger, the insults, and the loneliness, and he chose forgiveness over pride. Years passed, and Tunde's name had become something of a legend across Akure and the nearby villages. People no longer remembered him as the poor orphan who once fetched water for others. Now they spoke his name with a mixture of respect and curiosity. They whispered constantly, saying his wealth could not be natural. Some said he must have gone to the forest to make a covenant with spirits. Others claimed he had found the hiding place of the gods. There were nights when people crept quietly to his compound, hoping to see something strange. A few even tried to spy through the windows, but every time they looked, they saw nothing, only darkness and quiet. No one ever saw the clay pot. The old woman's words had come true. It remained invisible to all but him. Still, rumors spread wider. One evening, while Tunde sat outside under the moonlight, an unexpected visitor came to his gate. It was Fumi, his late uncle's wife. She was much older now, her back bent, her face wrinkled from years of struggle. Her wrapper was torn, and her feet were dusty. The moment Tunde saw her, he stood slowly, the memories of his childhood flashing through his mind. The beatings, the hunger, the nights he cried on the floor. But the woman before him no longer looked proud or cruel. She looked tired. She greeted him with trembling hands. "Tunde," she said softly, "I have heard what you have become. You are a great man now. I came to beg for forgiveness." Her voice cracked, and her eyes filled with tears. "Life has not been kind to me. My children left me. I have nothing left. Please, forgive how I treated you. I was foolish and heartless." Tunde looked at her for a long moment. The pain of the past stirred within him, but it did not harden his heart. He motioned for her to sit on the wooden bench in his courtyard. "You don't have to kneel, Mama," he said quietly. "Sit and rest." She obeyed, wiping her eyes. They sat in silence for a while. The only sound was the chirping of crickets outside the compound. Finally, Tunde spoke. "I forgave you a long time ago," he said. "If I had not, I would still be the same boy you once beat for eating late. You taught me what cruelty feels like. But my parents taught me what kindness means. So I chose to follow their path, not yours." Fumi lowered her head, ashamed. He stood, went inside, and returned with a small leather pouch filled with cowries. He placed it gently in her hands. "Use this to start a trade," he said. "Buy palm oil or yam. Just know that it doesn't cost much to be kind to those who do not have. If you had known that earlier, your life would have been different." The woman broke down crying, clutching the pouch to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaking. "God will bless you, my son." Tunde nodded slightly and watched as she walked away into the night, her figure shrinking into the distance. The next morning, Tunde traveled to the outskirts of the village where his parents were buried. The grave sat beneath two tall trees that had grown from the soil over the years, their roots spreading across the ground like arms protecting what lay beneath. He knelt before the mounds, brushing away dry leaves and clearing the earth with his hands. The air was quiet and cool, carrying the faint sound of birds from the nearby bush. "Pami, Mama," he said softly, "I came to thank you." His voice wavered, but he continued. "You raised me to be kind even when the world was not. You taught me never to return evil for evil. Everything I have now came because of what you planted in me." He stayed there for a long while, talking to them as if they could hear every word. He told them about his home, his business, and the people he had helped. "I hope I've made you proud," he whispered finally, his eyes wet. Then he bowed his head in silence. The wind picked up slightly, swaying the leaves above him. For a moment, he thought he heard a faint sound, like a woman's gentle laugh carried by the wind. But he said nothing. He simply smiled. When he returned home that evening, the village was calm. He walked through the dusty paths quietly, greeting everyone with a warm smile. In his heart, there was peace, Not the peace that comes from wealth, but the kind that comes from gratitude. That night, he sat in his room as he always did, the small clay pot resting silently in the corner. Its glow was faint, steady, and warm. He looked at it and nodded once, as though acknowledging a friend. Then he lay on his mat, his hands clasped together, and whispered words of gratitude to the old woman. Today's special hug go out to May from Colombia, Amos from Jamaica, Maxine from Georgia, USA, Freeman from Nigeria, and Lawrence from Zambia. May all your good dreams come true. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments so I can give you a special hug in my next story. And if you like and drop a comment on this story, your week will be as fruitful as a vine. Thank you.